I'm going to tell you exactly what my own son said to me, standing at a check-in counter in Charlotte, North Carolina, with his wife's hand resting on his arm like she was steadying a man, about to do something he half knew was wrong. And then I am going to tell you what I did about it, not what I felt, what I did. You decide who was wrong. It was 6:15 in the morning. I had a coffee going cold in my left hand because I have never once in 69 years finished a coffee while it was still hot, and I had a folded itinerary in the inside pocket of my cardigan, soft at the creases from being handled. My son Wesley was at the kiosk ahead of me, scrolling through something on his phone with the particular frown he gets when he's about to tell me a decision has already been made. "Mom," he said, "so, small change. Nothing major." I want you to notice that sentence. Nothing major. I have been hearing variations of that sentence my entire adult life, usually right before something major. "They moved some seats around," he said. "Mara found a way to save us about $400 on the family total. You're still going. You're just going a little different than the rest of us. A little different. I worked 41 years for an airline. I know exactly what that phrase means before anyone finishes saying it. It means somebody got moved to the back, alone, and somebody else is hoping she won't ask why. I didn't ask why. Not yet. I just looked at my son's face. 44 years old now, still has his father's jaw, still chews the inside of his cheek when he's nervous. A habit he's had since he was 7, and broke a neighbor's window with a baseball. And I said, "Show me." He turned the phone around. "I'm going to back up now, because you need to understand exactly how we got to that counter and exactly what was sitting in my purse the whole time, before any of them knew it was there. This trip had been 6 months in the planning. It was meant to be a celebration. Wesley and Mara's daughter, Sophie, had just gotten into her first-choice university, and somebody, I think it was Mara, suggested a family trip to Cancun before Sophie left for school in the fall. 5 days, 11 people, if you counted my daughter Denise and her husband, who live in Ohio and were flying in separately. Wesley appointed himself the logistics man for the trip, the way he appoints himself logistics man for everything, because Wesley likes a spreadsheet, the way other men like a fishing boat. He made a shared document. He color-coded the rooms. He put himself in charge of all bookings for efficiency, and nobody argued, because arguing with Wesley about a spreadsheet is like arguing with weather. I want to tell you a little about who I was before any of this, because I think it matters, and because nobody in my family ever asks me to tell it, so I've gotten out of the habit of offering. I grew up the youngest of 4 in a house outside Pittsburgh where nobody ever flew anywhere, where a trip meant a station wagon and a cooler of bologna sandwiches, and the first time I ever set foot on an airplane, I was 22 years old, wearing a uniform I'd ironed twice the night before because I couldn't believe anyone was going to pay me to do this. I met Frank 3 years later in a terminal, of all places. He was working the tower at the same airport, and he came through my line to ask, with absolutely no shame at all, if the woman checking his colleagues' bags wanted to get a cup of coffee sometime. We were married for 41 years. The same number, it turns out, as the years I worked the counter, though I've never decided if that's a coincidence worth mentioning, or just the shape 2 lives take when they're built around the same machine. I should tell you something about myself here. The rest of this makes sense. I spent 41 years as a gate agent for Lakeshore Air. I started in 1979 in a polyester uniform with a name tag that said Geraldine in letters so small you needed reading glasses to find it. And I retired in 2020, having worked every kind of irregular operation you can imagine. Snowstorms in Detroit, a hurricane evacuation out of Tampa that I still dream about sometimes, 3 different system-wide outages, and one Christmas Eve in 2011 when I personally rebooked 412 passengers by hand because the computers went down for 9 hours. My late husband Frank used to say I could read an airline's fine print the way other people read a room. He wasn't wrong. He was an air traffic controller for 30 years before his heart gave out in 2017, and between the 2 of us, this family has forgotten more about how air travel actually works than most travel agents will ever learn. My children know I worked for an airline. What they don't know, what I have never once found a reason to mention, because what is there to mention, it never came up, is that Lakeshore Air gives its retired employees with 30 years or more a small quiet thing, called a legacy pass. It isn't advertised. It isn't a status tier you'll find on a website. It's a laminated card the size of a driver's license that gives me priority rebooking in any irregular operation, lounge access, and space-available upgrades for the rest of my life, because 41 years is a long time to stand at a counter being kind to strangers, and the company, to its credit, remembers that. That card was in the zippered inside pocket of my carry-on the entire time my son was building his spreadsheet, along with something else, a printed, fully refundable itinerary on a flexible fare, which I had quietly bought myself with my own money the week before, after a feeling I couldn't entirely name settled into my stomach and didn't leave. I want to be honest with you, because honesty is the only thing I have left that I'm not willing to negotiate. I let Wesley book my seat into his big family arrangement. I didn't object. I didn't warn him. Some part of me, and I'm not proud of this part, but I won't pretend it wasn't there, wanted to see what he would do with me when he thought I wasn't watching closely enough to notice. He did exactly what I was afraid he'd do. Let me show you the spreadsheet itself, because I think it tells you more than I can. Wesley named the tab, Cancun, Final, Do Not Edit, which is the kind of phrase a man only writes when he has already imagined, in some private corner of his mind, somebody questioning him about it later. There were 11 rows, 11 names, 11 seat numbers, 11 little cells colored according to a scheme only he understood. Green for confirmed, yellow for pending, a pale gray for what he'd labeled, in the column header, Flex. My row was the only one in gray. I noticed that the first time he shared the document with the family group chat, back in February, and I said nothing about it, because at the time I assumed gray simply meant my ticket hadn't been finalized yet. I didn't yet understand that gray, in my son's spreadsheet, was its own kind of forecast. I watched that document change over 4 months the way you watch weather come in from a distance, slowly, then all at once. In March, my row still matched everyone else's flight number. By April, a small note appeared beside my name that said simply, TBD pricing. By May, the note had become a separate flight number altogether, on a separate confirmation, departing 90 minutes before the rest of the family, and connecting through a city none of them were routed through. Nobody called to tell me. Nobody so much as left a comment in the document, which Wesley had, ironically, enabled specifically so that everyone stays in the loop. I was in the loop. I was simply the only one in it who'd been quietly moved to a different lane of traffic without being told the lane had split. Here is what happened, in the order it happened. Wesley found what he called a phenomenal deal through a booking site called Voyage Saver, a third-party aggregator that bundles airline tickets the way a discount grocery store bundles dented cans. Cheap, because nobody is responsible for what's actually inside. He booked the whole family, Mara, the 2 kids, himself, on a connecting itinerary through Houston on a discount partner carrier called Comet Express. Basic fare, personal item only, no seat selection, boarding group last. $400 cheaper per ticket than booking direct. And then, 3 days before the trip, Mara had an idea. I know it was Mara's idea because I heard her say it. Not to me. To Wesley in their kitchen, while I was in the next room holding their younger boy Cole on my hip because he'd scraped his knee on their patio, and nobody else had noticed him crying. "Your mom's retired," Mara said, pen clicking. She has a habit of clicking a pen against her teeth when she's working something out, a little staccato sound like a clock that can't decide what time it is. She's not on anybody's schedule. We could move her off our connection and put her on the cheap red-eye through Houston instead. The one with the 4-hour layover nobody wants. Save another $210. She's got the time. She's not going to mind. She's got the time. I have turned that phrase over more times than I can count since that afternoon, as though time were the only thing I had left to spend, and spending it on a 4-hour layover in a Houston terminal with no lounge access and a vending machine for company was a fair trade for $210 that wasn't in the end even going to come out of my pocket. Wesley didn't argue with her. I want to be fair to him here, because fair is the only way I know how to tell a story. He didn't leap at it. He hesitated. I heard the hesitation in his voice, thin and short, before he said, "Yeah, okay, she won't mind." He said it like a man closing a drawer he didn't want to look into long. "So here's the medium-sized thing I need you to hold on to, because it matters later. I did not find out about any of this from Wesley. I found out because Cole, 7 years old, holding an ice pack to his knee, looked up at me with the kind of honesty only a 7-year-old still has, and said, "Why aren't you flying with us anymore, Grandma?" I sat him down very gently. I said I wasn't sure what he meant, and he told me in the careless, complete way children tell you things adults have spent real effort trying not to say, exactly what his parents had decided. I didn't confront anyone that day. I went home, made myself a cup of tea I let go cold, and I sat at my kitchen table. The same white oak table Frank built the spring of 2004, out in the garage, sanding it by hand because he said a store table wouldn't hold up to 40 years of Thanksgivings. And I opened my laptop and I looked very, very carefully at exactly what my son had booked. That's where turning point 1 happened. Not in a raised voice, not in an argument. It happened in silence, at that table, when I found the fine print on Comet Express's basic fare that Wesley had either not read or not understood. No changes permitted, no same-day standby, no protection in irregular operations beyond rebooking on Comet Express's own limited schedule. 3 flights a day on that route. Total. If anything at all went wrong with that connection in Houston, my son had built his entire family's return trip on a foundation with no floor under it. I'm going to let that sit for a moment, the way I let it sit at my table that night, because that is the moment the disrespect stopped being a feeling in my chest and became something written down in black and white, with my son's name on the confirmation number. I did not call him. I did not text him. I printed the itinerary. I folded it in quarters. I put it in my cardigan pocket, and I let 4 days pass exactly as if nothing had happened at all, because I wanted to see with my own eyes what my family would do with a woman they had decided didn't need to be consulted. You're with me at that counter now, in Charlotte, 6:15 in the morning. My son turning his phone around to show me a boarding pass that was not the boarding pass I had agreed to. Group 9, middle seat, row 31. A 4-hour layover in Houston with nothing but a vending machine and the particular fluorescent loneliness of a budget terminal at 2 in the afternoon. "You're still going to Cancun the same day as us," Wesley said, like that was the part that mattered. "You'll just land a little after we do. It's barely anything." I looked at the boarding pass on his screen for exactly as long as it takes to read it once. Then I looked at him. "Did you read the fare rules before you booked this, Wesley?" He blinked. "I read the price." "Those aren't the same document," I said. Mara stepped in then, the way she does, smooth as a closing door. "Geraldine, it's really not a big deal. It's one layover. You used to work for an airline. You practically live in these places. I want you to sit with that sentence too. You practically live in these places." 41 years of my life, reduced to a kind of fluency she assumed made the indignity smaller instead of larger, as if knowing the building meant I wouldn't notice being moved to its worst room. "How long is the layover?" I asked her. "Exactly?" She glanced at her phone, that rose gold watch on her wrist catching the terminal light as she turned her wrist to check the time against it. A small unconscious habit I'd noticed her doing again and again over the next 2 days, always at the worst moments, as though counting minutes had become a kind of nervous prayer. 4 hours, maybe a little less. 4 hours and 10 minutes, I said. In a terminal with one newsstand and a vending machine that's been out of order since at least last Tuesday, according to the airline's own service log, which I imagine neither of you looked at. Wesley shifted his weight. "Mom, it's really not that deep." "No," I agreed. "It isn't. That's rather my point." A line was building behind us. A young father with a sleeping toddler strapped to his chest cleared his throat, not rudely, just enough to remind us the world kept moving whether or not we'd finished. I stepped aside, let him through, watched Wesley's eyes follow the gesture with something that might have been embarrassment. "I'm going to my gate," I told them. "I'll see you in Cancun." "Mom," Wesley started. "I understand completely," I said again, and this time I let the smallest pause sit before I added, "You'll want to read your fare rules before you board, just in case." I didn't explain what I meant by that. I have found, over 41 years, that the people who most need a warning are rarely the people who'll thank you for giving it plainly. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let a sentence sit unexplained, and trust that the person it's meant for will remember it later, at the moment it finally matters. I have never once needed to raise my voice to be heard in an airport. That was, in fact, my entire profession. I said, I understand completely, and I meant something different by it than they thought I did, and I let them walk toward their gate while I walked, with my own folded itinerary and my own paid ticket, toward mine. Here is something for you to notice before we go any further, because I think you, watching this, already half know it the way I did standing in that terminal. A family that treats a person's comfort as a line item to be trimmed has already told you, out loud, which kind of family it is. They didn't hide it. Mara said it to my face. Your mom's retired. She's got the time. Love, in that house, had become a budget category, and budget categories get cut first when somebody's looking to save $400. I am not a vindictive woman. I want that understood before we go any further, because what's coming next is not revenge in the way people mean that word when they want to fight. What's coming next is simply this. I had already booked my own ticket on my own airline, with my own card in my purse, 3 days before any of them knew there was a problem to solve. I walked to gate B14, alone, carrying a rollerboard Frank gave me for our 40th anniversary, the year before he died, with a luggage tag that still has his handwriting on it. I sat down. I did not check my phone. I had a magazine I never opened, and a window that looked out over a runway. I had watched 10,000 takeoffs from In Another Life, in another uniform, and I felt for the first time in 6 months of spreadsheet emails and group chats I'd been quietly muted in, entirely at peace. This is what restraint feels like, by the way, in case nobody ever showed you. It is not silence because you have nothing to say. It is silence because you already know how the story ends, and you are simply waiting, politely, for everyone else to catch up. My flight to Cancun boarded on time, direct, no connection, a seat I had chosen myself in row 4, the kind of legroom Frank always called a luxury invented for people who've earned the right to stop apologizing for their knees. A flight attendant named Priscilla brought me a coffee before we'd even pushed back from the gate and called me ma'am in the specific, unhurried tone that tells you a crew has decided correctly that you are not going to be any trouble. I landed in Cancun at 11:40 in the morning, retrieved my bag, and was sitting under an umbrella at the resort with a glass of iced tea by 1:15. My son's family was still in Houston. I am going to tell you what happened to them now, because I didn't witness most of it directly. I pieced it together later, the way you piece together a story from someone who's still shaking slightly while they tell it. But I want you to understand the shape of it, because the shape of it is the whole point. A line of thunderstorms moved through the Gulf Coast that afternoon, the kind of system any working gate agent could have told you was forming 2 days out if you knew which models to watch. And I did know, because old habits don't retire just because you do. I had checked the weather pattern for that corridor 4 separate times in the week before the trip, the way Frank used to check barometric pressure the way other men check their phones. Not because I had any reason to expect trouble, but because 41 years teaches you to read a sky the way other people read a clock. Comet Express, cancelled. Its 4:40 connection out of Houston, not delayed, cancelled. And because my son had booked through a third-party aggregator on a basic fare with no same-day standby and no interline agreement with any other carrier, there was no automatic rebooking, no text message with a new gate number, no agent quietly working a list behind a counter with their names on it. There was a single overworked Comet Express representative at a kiosk in Terminal C, 300 people deep in a line that wasn't moving, and a recorded message looping over the gate speaker that said, with the particular cheerfulness airlines reserve for their worst news, that the next available seats on that route were Thursday. I learned later from Sophie, who at 17 has inherited her grandfather's habit of noticing details nobody asks her to notice, exactly what that terminal looked like by 6 o'clock. The air conditioning had failed in that section of the concourse, so the whole gate area smelled faintly of warm carpet and the particular sourness of 200 people who'd been traveling since dawn. Cole had cried twice, once when he dropped his tablet and the screen cracked, and once, quieter, when he asked Mara if they were going to miss the whole trip, and she didn't answer him fast enough. Wesley had gotten into a short, useless argument with the Comet Express representative, a young man named Devin who kept repeating, with the flat patience of someone reading from a script he hadn't written and couldn't deviate from, that the booking class didn't qualify for hotel accommodation or meal vouchers, because the cancellation was weather-related and the fare itself excluded irregular operations coverage entirely. "I'm sorry, sir," Devon said, according to Sophie, at least 4 separate times. "There's nothing in the system I'm able to do." There's nothing in the system I'm able to do. I have said that sentence myself, more times than I can count, across 4 decades, to passengers who looked at me afterward the way I imagine my son looked at Devon, as if the sentence were a personal failure of character, instead of what it actually was, which is the truth, plainly stated, by someone with no authority to change it. The difference, the only difference, is that I always knew which other sentence to say next, the one that sometimes moved a person from that kiosk to an actual seat. Devon didn't know that sentence. His airline had never given him one to say. Thursday. The trip was 5 days long. Wesley called me at 6:50 that evening. I was on the resort's open-air terrace, a glass of iced tea sweating a ring onto the white tablecloth in front of me, listening to a trio play something soft near the pool, and I let it ring twice before I answered, not out of cruelty, but because I wanted to finish the sip of tea I was in the middle of. There is a kind of calm you only get to keep if you refuse to let someone else's emergency borrow it from you. "Mom." His voice had a thinness to it I hadn't heard since he was 19, and called me from a police station parking lot, certain his life had just ended over something that, in the end, hadn't. "We're stuck. The flight got cancelled, and there's nothing. There's literally nothing, Mom. The website just says Thursday." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. And I was. I want to be clear about that, because it would be easy for you to assume otherwise. Watching this, I was sorry. I have stood on the other side of that exact counter, watching exactly that look cross a stranger's face 400 times over. I never once enjoyed it then, and I didn't enjoy hearing it in my own son's voice now. But sorry and surprised are different things, and I was only one of them. Is there anything you can do? You used to do this for a living." There it was, the thing they'd never once asked me, in 6 months of spreadsheets and seat charts, until the exact moment it became useful to them. I am going to tell you something now that I have never said to another living soul outside this conversation, which is the only reason I'm telling it to you and not to him directly. Even now, I could have helped him in that moment. I had sitting in my purse a legacy pass that came with priority access to a rebooking desk. Most travelers don't even know exists, a desk where retired employees and their immediate traveling companions can sometimes be moved ahead of a public queue in a real operational meltdown. I could have called a number I still remembered by heart, and very likely had my son's family on a flight within the hour. I didn't call that number. Not yet. "Wesley," I said, "what does your booking actually say you're entitled to?" Silence on the line. I could hear, behind him, a child crying, not Cole's scraped knee crying, the real kind, the kind that comes from being tired and scared and 12 years old in a terminal that smells like burnt pretzels and recycled air. And I could hear Mara's voice somewhere behind that, sharp and fast, the particular octave a person reaches for when panic has nowhere else to go. I didn't read all of it," Wesley said. "It was the best price." "It usually is," I said. "That's generally how that works." "Mom, please, and I'm not asking you to lecture me. I'm asking if there's anything you can actually do." "I asked you a question first," I said, "and I'd like an answer before I decide anything. What does Devon at the kiosk keep telling you? Exactly, word for word." He told me, "There's nothing in the system I'm able to do." I let the sentence sit on the line between us for a moment, the way I always do when I want someone to hear what they've just said back to themselves. "That's not Devon's fault," I said. "I want you to understand that before we go any further, Devon didn't build the system. He's just the one standing in front of it when it fails, same as I was for 41 years. The system was built by someone who decided, on a spreadsheet somewhere, that the cheapest fare class wouldn't include protection, because protection costs money, and most people never read far enough to notice they'd agreed to go without it." "Okay," Wesley said, and his voice had gone very small, the way it used to when he was a boy confessing something. "Okay, I hear it. I do. Can you help us?" I'm not proud of the silence I let sit there. I'm also not going to pretend I regret it. This is the part of the story where I have to be fair to my son, because a story where every villain stays a villain the whole way through isn't a true story. It's just a complaint with better lighting. Wesley grew up watching his father and me count grocery coupons at this same white oak table, watching us refinance a mortgage twice to put him and his sister through college, watching me clip airline employee discounts the way other women clip recipes. He didn't build that spreadsheet because he doesn't love me. He built it because somewhere in the last 2 years, and I only learned this later, sitting across from him with nothing between us but the truth, his contracting business had lost its biggest client, and he had spent 8 months too proud to tell anyone, including his own wife, exactly how close to the edge that left them. $400 wasn't nothing to him. It was the kind of number that, when you're frightened enough, starts to feel like the only number you can control. That doesn't make what he did to me right. I want to be precise about that, because precision is the only kindness I have any patience for. But it means that when I finally did pick up the phone and dial a number I hadn't used since 2020, I wasn't doing it to rescue a man who'd wronged me out of carelessness. I was doing it for a frightened man who'd made a bad decision under pressure he hadn't told anyone about, and for 2 children standing in a terminal who hadn't made any decision at all. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to that resort terrace, because the part you need to see first is the part where I simply sat for 2 more hours doing absolutely nothing while my family's plan finished unraveling 2,000 miles away. You should know what that looked like from where I was sitting, because it is, I think, the entire point of this story. It looked like nothing at all. It looked like a woman in a cotton dress, watching a sunset go from gold to the color of a ripe peach over water, so clear you could see the shadow of the pier pilings on the sand beneath it. It looked like a second glass of iced tea. No urgency, no checked phone. The hotel's lounge had a small lending library, and I picked a paperback at random and read 40 pages. I don't remember a word of now, because I wasn't really reading. I was simply enjoying, for the first time in longer than I'd admit to anyone, the specific luxury of being exactly where I'd planned to be, dressed for dinner, while 2 gates and 1 canceled connection away. The plan that had been built to save $400 finished costing considerably more than that. A waiter named Tomas came by twice to ask if I needed anything, and the second time, noticing my plate still untouched, asked gently if I was waiting on someone. My family, I told him. They're running a little behind. He nodded the way good service staff do, without prying further, and refilled my water glass, and the ice settling against the side of it made a small, bright sound that stayed with me since, the sound of a thing being taken care of properly by someone whose whole job is paying attention to details other people walk right past. I thought, sitting there, about all the passengers I'd ever watched come unglued at a counter over far less than what my son's family was facing 2 gates over in Houston. I thought about a man in Pittsburgh in 1994 who threw his boarding pass at me because his connection had been weathered out, and how I'd stood there and taken it, because that was the job, and because underneath the anger was always just fear. Fear of being late for a funeral, a wedding, a job that wouldn't hold the position open. I never once, in 41 years, met a passenger who was truly angry about an airplane. They were angry about everything the airplane was supposed to deliver them to in one piece, and the airplane simply happened to be standing in the way when the fear came out. I wondered if Wesley understood that yet about himself. I suspected he was a few hours from finding out. My phone stayed quiet for a long while after the canceled connection alert I'd seen flash across the family group chat. A single curt line from Wesley, "Delayed, will update," which told me, more by what it didn't say than what it did, that the $400 Mara had been so proud of saving was, by then, the last thing on anyone's mind. It buzzed again at 8:20, a text this time from Mara, which told me something all on its own. Mara doesn't text me. Mara delegates the texting of me to Wesley, the way you delegate an unpleasant phone call to whoever's better at it. "We are so sorry. We didn't think this through. Can you help us?" I read it twice. I'm going to tell you honestly what I felt, because I promised you honesty at the start of this, and I intend to keep that promise, even where it isn't flattering. I felt a small, sharp satisfaction, the kind you feel when a thing you predicted comes true exactly the way you predicted it. And right behind it, almost in the same breath, I felt something closer to grief, because somewhere underneath the satisfaction was a woman who had simply wanted to be asked to come along, the regular way, the way you ask someone you intend to keep. I called Wesley back instead of texting. Some things deserve a voice. "Tell me exactly where you're standing," I said, "and tell me exactly what's printed on your boarding passes. Read it to me." Word for word, he read it to me. I listened the way I used to listen at a counter, with a small print that tells you everything. The fare class code, the carrier code, the booking reference structure that told me in about 4 seconds this had been ticketed through a consolidator with almost no leverage anywhere in the system. "Okay," I said. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to make one phone call. I want you to understand something before I make it, and I want you to actually hear me, Wesley, not just wait for me to stop talking. This is not me undoing what you did. This is me choosing to help you because Sophie and Cole are standing in an airport at 8 o'clock at night, and that has nothing to do with anyone's pride." There was a long pause, long enough that I could hear the terminal noise behind him settle into something almost like held breath. "Okay," he said quietly. "Yeah, I hear you." I called the number from memory. I gave my employee ID, retired status, full name, and the names of the 4 family members traveling with a confirmation code that had nothing to do with my own ticket. A woman named Raina, who I have never met and likely never will, pulled up the irregular operations board for that corridor, found a partner carrier with 3 open seats on a 9:55 departure and 1 more on standby, and moved my son's family onto Lakeshore Metal, the airline I gave 41 years to, the one that still, 8 years after I retired, agreed that a woman like me deserved to be helped first when the rest of the system fell apart. It took 11 minutes. 11 minutes against the 4 hours they'd already lost standing in a line that wasn't moving, behind a kiosk attended by one person who had no power to fix anything because the airline they'd chosen to save $400 had never built a kiosk with that kind of power to begin with. That's the whole reversal right there, in case you want to know exactly where to mark it. The assumption everyone in that family had quietly carried, that I was the soft, schedulable one, the one with time to spare and nowhere urgent to be, the piece you moved to make the rest of the board fit, broke completely the moment it turned out I was the only person standing in that airport, or near it, who actually understood how the board worked. I didn't gloat. I want to be very clear about that, because I think it would be easy to imagine I sat there enjoying it, and I didn't, not in the way you might expect. I simply finished my iced tea, paid the small tab with cash, the way I always do, and went up to my room to unpack, because there was nothing left for me to manage. The unraveling was someone else's now, and so, for the first time in this whole trip, was the fixing of it. I want to take a moment here and speak to you directly, the way I would if you were sitting across from me at that white oak table instead of watching a screen. If you have ever had a family quietly decide, without a vote, without even telling you the meeting happened, that you were the flexible one, the one whose time didn't cost anything, whose comfort was the easiest line to cut. I want you to hear this clearly. That decision tells you everything about what they believe love is for. Some people think love means showing up for each other when it's inconvenient. Other people think love is a budget, and budgets get trimmed wherever the trimming hurts the least to watch. You will know which kind of family you have the very first time the bill comes due, because the trimming always starts in the same place, with whoever they've decided won't make a scene about it. I didn't make a scene. I made a phone call. The family landed in Cancun at 11:40 that night, 4 hours and 20 minutes later than planned. Exhausted, rumpled, Cole asleep on Wesley's shoulder with a half-eaten airport pretzel still clenched in one fist. I met them at the resort's open-air lobby in the cotton dress I'd worn to dinner, a cup of decaf in my hand, because I have never in my life slept well the first night somewhere new, and I wasn't about to start lying about it now. Mara saw me first. I watched something cross her face that I want to describe honestly, because it wasn't simple, and I don't think it's fair to her to make it simple. It wasn't only shame. There was real exhaustion in it, the bone-deep kind that comes from holding 2 frightened children together through 4 hours of nobody telling you anything, and underneath that, something that looked almost like relief. Relief that whatever had been coming for her, in the form of this conversation, had finally arrived, instead of hovering. "Geraldine." She set her bag down. She didn't pick it back up. "Thank you, really. I genuinely don't know what we would have done." "You'd have figured it out," I said. "People generally do. It would have just cost you Thursday instead of 11 minutes. She didn't say anything to that. I'll give her this much credit. And I think she's earned it. She didn't try to explain it away either. Some people, caught, immediately start narrating a version of events where they're less responsible than they were. Mara just stood there, in the lobby light, looking like a woman who'd run out of better ideas, and that, more than any apology, was the thing that told me she actually understood what had happened. Sophie hugged me without a word, the way teenagers do when they've decided somewhere over the last few hours that a grandmother is suddenly worth more than they'd priced her at that morning. Cole was already half asleep against Wesley's shoulder, the cracked tablet still clutched in one fist like he couldn't bear to let it go, even unconscious. And Wesley himself stood a few feet back from the rest of them, holding 2 duffel bags he clearly hadn't set down once since Houston, watching me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was a teenager, waiting to find out exactly how much trouble he was in. "Go to bed," I told all of them. "Every one of you. There's nothing that needs deciding tonight." We didn't have the real conversation that night. Everyone was too tired, and tired is not when truth does its best work. It just makes truth sound like an accusation no matter how gently you mean it. I sent them all to bed. I went back to my room. I did not sleep particularly well, but that had nothing to do with any of them. It never does, at my age. The body simply stops asking permission to wake up at 3 in the morning. The real conversation happened the next afternoon, on the terrace, after Sophie and Cole had gone down to the pool with their cousins, and it was just the 3 of us, Wesley, Mara, and me, at a round glass table with a pitcher of water sweating between us and absolutely nowhere left for anyone to hide. I want to walk you through this part slowly, because this is the part where the card actually gets played, and I think you deserve to see exactly how that happens when a woman has been planning to play it calmly her whole life and finally gets the chance. "I want to ask you something, Aisna," I said, "and I want an honest answer, not the answer you think will make this easier." Wesley nodded. He had his father's jaw set in the particular way that means he already knows the answer isn't going to be comfortable. "When you moved my seat," I said, "did you think about what it would cost me? Or did you only think about what it would save you?" Mara opened her mouth. I lifted one hand, not sharply, just enough. "Let him answer that one." Wesley was quiet for a long moment, turning his water glass in a slow circle on the table, leaving a wet ring that grew and shrank as he turned it. "I thought about what it would save us," he said finally. I told myself it was the same thing. It wasn't. "No," I said. "It wasn't. Mom, I have to tell you something." His voice dropped, the way it used to when he was small and about to confess something he'd been carrying alone. "The business lost the Halloran contract back in October. I haven't told anybody that, not even Mara, not really, not the whole truth of it. We're not where I let people think we are. $400 felt like it mattered more than it should have. I know that's not an excuse. I just want you to know it wasn't about you not mattering. It was about me being scared and not telling anyone, and you were the easiest place to take it out on, because you've never once made anyone feel guilty for asking you for less." I sat with that for a moment. I'm not going to tell you it fixed anything instantly, because that isn't how 44 years of a mother-son relationship works, and I won't insult either of us by pretending otherwise. But it did something. It turned a son who had wronged me into a man who was frightened and ashamed and finally honest about both. And there is a real difference between forgiving the first kind of person and forgiving the second. "You should have told me," I said. "Not about the seat, about the business. I have spent 41 years learning how to fix things that fall apart at the worst possible time. That's not a skill I retired, Wesley. I just stopped getting paid for it." Mara was looking at the tablecloth. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost the smoothness it usually carries, the closing door quality gone out of it entirely. "I'm the one who suggested it," she said. "I want to say that out loud because I don't want him carrying the whole thing. I said you wouldn't mind. I didn't ask you if you'd mind. I decided for you, and that's—" She stopped, started again. That's not a small thing, is it? Deciding what someone else can absorb without asking them. No, I said, it isn't. Can I ask you something? Mara said. She had stopped touching her watch, I noticed. Her hands were flat on the table now, still, the way a person's hands go still when they've finally run out of things to fidget toward. When you let us go ahead and book it that way, when you didn't say anything, were you testing us? It was a fair question. I owed her a fair answer. A little, I said. Mostly I was waiting to see if anyone would ask me what I actually wanted, instead of deciding what I could afford to live without. There's a difference between those two questions, and most families never learn it, because the people who get the second question instead of the first rarely say anything about it. They just get quieter. Every time. Until one day they're not in the room at all, and everyone's surprised, and nobody remembers exactly when the room got smaller. Wesley's jaw tightened, the way it does, the old cheek-chewing habit working at the inside of his mouth. I don't want to be the reason you get quieter, he said. Then don't decide things for me you haven't asked me about, I said. That's the whole instruction. It isn't complicated. It's just inconvenient sometimes to actually ask. I reached into my purse then, slowly, no theater to it, the same motion I'd make reaching for my reading glasses. And I set two things on the glass table between us. The folded itinerary, soft at its creases now from 4 days of being carried, and the laminated card the size of a driver's license, the one none of them had ever seen, the one that had been sitting quietly in that zippered pocket through every spreadsheet, every color-coded room assignment, every conversation about what I had the time for. This is what I never mentioned, I said, not because I was hiding it, because it never came up, and because I have never once in my life used what I know to make someone else feel small for not knowing it too. I bought my own ticket the week before this trip, with my own money, because something told me I should, and I have had this card in my purse since 2020, because 41 years of doing this work for strangers earned me the right to never be stranded by it myself. I didn't use it to help you the moment you called. I want you to understand that was a choice, not an oversight. I wanted you to feel, just once, what it is to stand in a terminal with no one coming for you. And then I wanted you to know that someone was always coming for you, the whole time. I was just waiting to see if you'd ask, the right way, before I came. Nobody said anything for a moment. Out past the terrace railing, I could hear Cole shrieking with delight about something in the pool. The particular, unbothered joy of a 12-year-old who has already forgotten, the way children mercifully can, that the night before had frightened him at all. Wesley picked up the laminated card, turned it over once in his hands, the way you'd hold something you suddenly understand you'd had no right to assume you knew everything about. 41 years, he said quietly. I don't think I ever actually asked you what that meant. The whole time you worked there, I just knew you went to the airport and came home. Most people don't ask, I said. It's all right. It isn't owed to me, but it might have saved you $400 and a very long night if you had. That's as close to the last word as I let it get. I have never needed the last word, not with him, not with anyone. I learned a long time ago that the last word is usually just the first word said louder, and I have spent my whole life choosing the quieter way through a room. I picked the itinerary and the card back up off the glass table, folded the paper once more along its soft crease, and slid both of them back into my purse, where they had been the entire time, doing exactly what they were always going to do. I want to speak to you directly again just for a moment, because I think this is the part people skip past too quickly in stories like this one, eager to get to the satisfying part. And I don't think the satisfying part is actually the part that matters most. The satisfying part was 11 minutes on a telephone. The part that mattered was a man finally telling his mother he was frightened, and a woman finally telling her mother-in-law that deciding what someone else can absorb without asking them is not a small thing. Those two sentences cost nothing and saved more than $400. Ever could. The rest of the trip went the way trips are supposed to go, mostly. Sophie turned 18 2 days into it, and we had a small cake the hotel kitchen made with too much frosting and not enough cake, the way hotel cakes always are. And nobody mentioned the airport again, not because it was forbidden, but because it had finished saying what it needed to say. Denise arrived the next morning from Ohio, on her own flight, on time, and laughed so hard when Mara told her the story over breakfast that she had to set her fork down on the white tablecloth and didn't pick it back up for a full minute. I let her laugh. Some stories are allowed to be funny once the fear has finished leaving the room. I flew home 5 days later the same way I'd flown down, direct, my own seat, in row 4, with my own folded itinerary tucked back into my cardigan pocket where it had ridden the whole trip, getting softer at its creases with every handling. Wesley offered, on the way to the airport, to change his own family's return flight, to match mine, to fly together this time, all of us on the same metal, no separate bookings, no spreadsheet deciding who got moved to save what. You don't have to do that, I told him. I know, he said. I want to. I let him. I am home now. It's a Tuesday afternoon in late June, and I am sitting at the white oak table Frank built in 2004, the one that has held 40 years of Thanksgivings and one very long, very quiet conversation on a hotel terrace in Cancun, and I am doing something almost embarrassingly ordinary. I am filing things. I keep a binder. I've kept it since I retired, an old habit that never quite let go of me, where I file boarding passes, receipts, the small paper evidence of where I've been and what it cost and who paid for it. I slid the Cancun boarding pass into its plastic sleeve a few minutes ago. Row 4. On time. My own name spelled correctly, which still matters to me more than I can entirely explain. There's a particular sound a binder ring makes when it clicks shut. A small, flat snap. No drama to it at all. And I have always found something settling in that sound, the same way Frank used to find something settling in the click of the front door deadbolt every night before bed. A small mechanical confirmation that everything that needed locking down had, in fact, been locked down. The phone rang while I was doing it. Denise, calling from Ohio just to talk, the way she does most Tuesdays now. Mara texted me, she said. She wants to know if you'd help plan the trip next year. Said, and I'm quoting her exactly, nobody touches a booking without running it by Geraldine first. I laughed quietly, the way I laugh now, not loud, never loud, just enough to mean it. Tell her I'd be happy to help, I said. Tell her I'll read every word of the fine print, same as I always have. That's never been the part I minded doing. It's the only part of this whole business I was ever any good at. You know, Denise said, Wesley told me he framed something. From the trip, wouldn't say what. I didn't ask what it was. I had a fair idea. Some things, once a person understands them, don't need to be spoken of again to keep doing their work. I hung up the phone. I closed the binder. Outside my kitchen window, the late afternoon light was doing the thing it does this time of year, turning gold and a little slow, the way it falls across a table that's been holding this family together since before half of them were born. I made myself another cup of tea, the kind I'd let go cold before I finished it, same as always, and I carried it out to the back porch, where Frank's old wind chime, the cheap aluminum kind he bought at a hardware store in 1998 and refused, on principle, to ever replace with something nicer, was doing its thin, uneven clatter in a breeze that smelled like cut grass and somebody's charcoal grill 2 yards over. I sat there a long while, long enough for the tea to go cold properly, the way I prefer it. I have spent 41 years watching what happens when a system breaks, and somebody has to be the one still standing at the counter when it does. I have learned that it is never the loudest person in that line who fixes it. It is the person who already read the rules before anyone else thought the rules would matter. You put the woman who worked the gate for 40 years in the worst seat in the house, and you go ahead and see, with your own eyes, who is still standing at the counter when the whole thing finally comes apart. I already knew the answer. I just let them find out for themselves. And the next time someone in my family says I've got the time, I expect they'll mean it the way it was always supposed to be meant. Not as the cheapest seat left on the board, but as the simple truth that I have always had time for them. The real kind. The kind that doesn't show up on anybody's spreadsheet. And that I was only ever waiting to be asked.